one of the questions which was coming up all the time was who profits from the segregation, who profits from this turnover in the housing market, and that of course gets me back to the kind of questions I nearly always end up asking these days, like, okay, show me the money, where the money's flowing, who's getting, you know, a real benefit out of it. I think the idea of the Hudson Yards all along was to be the western extension of Midtown. What in effect has happened is that this has now been seized upon, and so you've got this pole of development here, and there's a gap now between this and the Midtown. So I guess this is the sort of thing that Neil Smith used to talk about the rent gap. And that almost certainly there's a huge pressure now for redevelopment, and you already see some of the buildings being refurbished and redone. Some may end up being knocked down and high-rises put in. The original population from the 1980s has completely disappeared from here. The city is a concentrated space in which many different functions can coexist and can work together in such a way as to facilitate social reproduction. Unfortunately, that social reproduction has to include, in our case, reproduction of capital as well as reproduction of people. And so what we see is a concentration of resources to build a city which is going to facilitate capital accumulation and is therefore functioning for capital accumulation. One of the things that it's crucial to understand about capital is that it has to expand in order to survive. Historically, the rate of growth has always been positive in a healthy capitalist economy, and usually people look to 3 or 4% rate of growth as being, you know, adequate. But zero growth is a crisis. So you've got to grow. Now, where do you grow and where do you grow into? Okay, I'm investing in a city and I build up and the city's built up. Now, what do I do? Well, okay, if the city's built up, I've got to sort of expand it somehow, but I then build the suburbs. Then, you know, how do we get to the suburb and back again? You've got to have the new transport and communications structures. So there's a spatial growth aspect to this, which is always there. This process is about capital, which is expanding at a compound rate of 3% forever, having harder and harder time finding sensible and serious things to do in a world which obviously needs a great deal in terms of facilities and services and the rest of it. We've got a politics of austerity which cuts back on all of the things we really need, and at the same time goes off and builds these crazy monuments to I don't know what in Dubai and here in New York with all the condos and all the rest of it going up. So this was what I call a spatial fix, which is about the fact that you have to grow at a compound rate, and I think we're facing that as one of the big contradictions of contemporary capitalist life. I mean, I grew up in a sort of respectable working class neighborhood in Britain, where the way in which housing was thought of was essentially in what Marx would call use value terms. I mean, you wanted a place to live and you got a decent place to live, and it was very important. About 20 years later, suddenly you find people are really less and less thinking about the use value. They're more and more thinking about the exchange value. And then there comes a point, in the 1990s it started to become much more like this, where actually housing became an instrument of speculative gain, where people, instead of just thinking about the exchange value, started to think about the house as a form of capital accumulation by getting a house, fixing it up, flipping it, and going on to somewhere else, so on. I have to say that since I moved to New York, I've thought more and more, as many people I know think about New York as a city. And they think about it as a political entity. And that civic sense is what I would say forms the heart of a body politic. And a body politic doesn't pre-exist, it has to be created and it has to be nurtured and the like. So there's something relational about being in this space which is New York, which makes it New York.